Hello, everyone, and good morning or good evening, depending on where you are right now. For those of you that couldn't participate yesterday, let me remind you that THINKClima virtual conference lobbying for inaction is organized by the CritiCC research group. It's a research group from the communication department of Pompeu Fabra University. I'm also I also teach at the UPF at Pompeu Fabra University, but after being for more than 20 years in the communication department, I moved to the experimental science department, and there I still research and teach in science, environmental, and health communication. There I am in charge of a center of studies that the name is Center of Studies in Science, Communication, and Society. So I'm very happy that Jose and Nuria contacted me to chair this session because it's very, very related with my day-by-day activity in my research field, and not only research field, but also my worries and my main worries for right now. So, but I am also explaining all these things about me that is not normal in with the chairperson. It's not normal to explain all these things, because I want to stress that when we are in front of complex issues like climate change or climate emergency or human behaviors, it is very necessary to have this multidisciplinary approach, multidisciplinary debates and multidisciplinary research. So this is one of the things that I want to stress in this conference. Even it is very, very specialized, the issue, the main issue, but the approach should not be so specifically. So I'm happy to see that backgrounds from the speakers and probably from the participants are multidisciplinary. So with this idea in mind, let's start the roundtable Fighting Climate Misinformation that I'm going to chair. Communication can strategically be used. For instance, it could be used to stimulate individuals, societal and political reactions. But it could also be used as a tool to persuade people to deny there is a problem, nor that it has an anthropogenical origin, or that it's necessary to act or react. Communication could influence public perceptions and human behaviors, including policymakers' behaviors, if we can use the word human for them. Communication could be used to force changes of policies and politics, or just to justify and perpetuate inaction. So I think this roundtable is very adequate and very opportune in time. To discuss about this issue, we have 4 guest speakers. The idea is that I will introduce each of them, and then he or she will give us their talk. And after the 4th presentation, we will have some time to questions and answers and commentaries. So let me now introduce the first speaker. He's John Cook. He is a postdoctoral researcher fellow at the Climate Change Communication Research Hub at Monash University. His research focuses in understanding and countering misinformation about climate change, with an emphasis on using critical thinking to build resilience. He's going to talk about computer-assisted detection and classification of misinformation about climate change. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gema. So as Gema was saying, my research looks at two elements: understanding and countering misinformation. And I'm going to talk about the first half of that. Some of my research over the last few years into understanding climate misinformation and getting a better sense of the type of misinformation that is growing in popularity out in the world, I guess. And the way we've done that is we've been taking a machine learning approach, which is not my discipline. Gemma also mentioned the need for interdisciplinary collaborations. And my discipline is cognitive science and psychology, but I've been working with two political scientists based in the UK, Travis Cohen and Constantine Boussalis, who both are experts in machine learning. And we've been, our goal has been to train a machine to automatically detect misinformation about climate change. And our ultimate goal is what misinformation researchers call the holy grail of fact-checking, which is being able to automatically detect and instantly respond to misinformation in real time. That's our pie-in-the-sky goal, but there are obviously a lot of steps before you can get to that point. And what I'm going to talk about today is that first step. Now, our paper is currently under review, but you can read a prepress of it at the URL at the top of the screen here, sks.to/cards paper. This paper, and I should acknowledge our fourth collaborator in this, Miriam Nanko, also based at Exeter University with Travis. And the reason that the URL is cards paper is because internally we've been calling this project CARDS, Computer Assisted Recognition of Denial and Skepticism. It's just our shorthand for the project. But I wanted to mention it because we put a lot of effort into coming up with that acronym. We brainstormed a lot of options. Now, this was the approach that we took in training a machine to detect and categorize climate misinformation. The first thing we needed to do was build a corpus or a data set of climate misinformation. And we decided to look at two sources, two very prolific sources of climate misinformation, and also low-hanging fruit in the sense that they were very easy to scrape. We looked at conservative think tank websites who really have the longest history of, or one of the longest history of climate misinformation. And secondly, climate denial blogs who have been very productive, particularly around the mid-2000s and onwards. And we scraped articles from both sources from the late 1990s. And in total, we scraped about 250,000 articles. And this is roughly how many articles we got from both sources. The top graph being conservative think tanks, the bottom graph being blogs, climate denial blogs. And you see that conservative think tanks have been productive for much longer, but climate denials really ramped up in the late 2000s and have been quite productive. So we were able to scrape a lot of misinformation. The other reason why we chose these two sources was because they were known sources of misinformation. Scraping climate articles from, for example, mainstream media would have scraped a lot of accurate articles as well as misinformation, and we needed to scrape content from where we knew the content would be misinformation. And the next step we did was we randomly selected paragraphs from our data set, and the three of us, Travis, Constantine, and myself, we iteratively built a taxonomy of climate misinformation claims. In order to train a machine to detect misinformation claims, you need to have that framework of claims in the first place. And so our approach to do that was we looked at like 50 paragraphs of misinformation randomly selected and started to build this taxonomy of claims. But then iteratively, we went through that process about 10 times, and gradually the taxonomy took shape. And after about 10 times, it became relatively stable, and we were happy with the taxonomy as it was. And what was really interesting was these 5 main categories. Now, it's completely separate to our work in the psychology realm. Ed Maybach and other psychology researchers at Yale and George Mason had been doing psychological research of climate attitudes and developed what they called the 5 key climate beliefs, being it's real, it's us, it's bad, the experts agree, and there's hope that we can solve climate change. These were the 5 key things that people believe about climate change, or the 5 things that you need to communicate about climate change. And it was interesting because climate misinformation was kind of the mirror universe, the opposite of those 5 climate beliefs. It's not real, it's not us, it's not bad, you can't trust the experts, and there's no hope, or the solutions won't work. And it was just an interesting parallel that climate misinformation was really about eroding public belief in these 5 key climate beliefs. Now, underneath those 5 top line categories, there were a lot of interesting subcategories and even sub-subcategories, but I'll just draw your attention to 2 of them. The blue section of the taxonomy, and I apologize if it's a bit difficult to read, we're trying to cram a lot of information into this taxonomy, but there are really 2 main categories of solutions misinformation: attacks on climate policy, or casting doubt on the efficacy of climate policy, and attacks on climate technology or solution, renewable technology, whether it's criticizing wind energy, solar energy, or other forms of renewable power. The other subcategories I want to draw your attention to is the purple section, which was misinformation attacking climate science or climate scientists. And these are the 2 main categories of misinformation in this casting doubt on the reliability of climate science. Either ad hominem attacks against scientists and other key figures in the climate movement, or attacks on the climate science itself, whether it's attacking climate models, attacking climate data like thermometer measurements or sea level measurements. And so these are the 2 kind of main areas of casting doubt on climate science, either the people or the science itself. I'll come back to these later, so those distinctions are important. Once we had our taxonomy and we had our data set, the next step was to train the machine to be able to detect misinformation itself. And this is a non-trivial process. We began doing a pilot test with some communication students at George Mason University, and the inter-rater reliability between these coders was almost non-existent. It was pretty much worthless data. And what we realized was you need climate literate coders to be able to reliably code climate misinformation. And so then we went to a very skilled climate literate group, the Skeptical Science team. So this is the team of volunteers who write rebuttals on the skepticalscience.com website. And we recruited, I think it was 24 coders in total. And we went through the task of taking 87,000 randomly selected paragraphs from our data set, and each paragraph was coded 3 times by 3 different people. So that's about 270,000 codings in total. This took months, and a total, this was volunteers doing it in their spare time, and it added up to over 1,000 hours in coding. And at the end of it, we had a single coding, we used a majority rule to basically decide the coding, the official coding for each of these 87,000 paragraphs. And then we trained our machine using several different machine learning models. And then we found that the average of two different machine learning models gave us the most accurate result. And having done that, having trained the machine, we then, and just to give you an insight into the process, this is what it looked like when our volunteers were coding the different paragraphs. They were shown in a web-based system, a single paragraph, and they had to choose one of those top 5 categories or none if there was no misinformation in the paragraph. And then if they chose a super claim or top category, then a subclaim would show up and they had to choose that. And then if they chose a subclaim, then a subclaim would come up. So it was a 3-step process. We just had to repeat that 87,000 times. So as I said, very laborious. And then once we had trained the machine, we then constructed a history of climate misinformation over 2 decades. So we fed 287,000 paragraphs into into our machine. Sorry, this slide is a little bit inaccurate. Let me just jump forward to the final results. Once we fed our entire data set into the machine, it then constructed for us a 2-decade history of climate misinformation. And we were able to see which of those 5 categories were the most common, most popular, and also how they changed over time. And immediately, the first thing that jumped out at us was the fact that the 3 science categories, it's not real, it's not us, it's not bad, were a very minor part of the misinformation. I was surprised at this because having run skeptical science for over a decade, that's the focus of skeptical science, is debunking myths about climate science. But it turns out that the biggest category of misinformation is, depending on the corpus, but the 2 big categories of misinformation are either attacks on climate science or attacks on solutions, or just casting doubt on climate solutions, whether it's policy or renewable technology. And not only are these the 2 biggest categories, climate solutions is a growing category. So whether it's conservative think tanks or blogs, we see that solutions misinformation is on the increase. In conservative think tanks, it's already the biggest category of misinformation. On blogs, not quite exactly. Attacks on science is the biggest category, but solutions is increasing. So I think probably the main take home, if you take one thing away from this presentation, it's that the future of climate misinformation is solutions misinformation. And we need to be devoting more resources to coming up, understanding solutions misinformation and developing responses to it. Let me dive into it a little bit more detail. I'm just trying to check how much time I've got. I've probably got a couple more minutes. Firstly, there were 2 main subcategories of solutions misinformation. Attacks on climate policies, and particularly saying that climate policies would be harmful, as in they would harm the economy, or they raise prices which would harm, parts of the population. And secondly, misinformation targeting renewable energy. Now, attacks on policy was the most common subcategory of solutions misinformation, but clean energy misinformation is also on the relative increase. I think that if we extended this to 2021, you might see a big spike, at least in the US misinformation, when that cold snap hit Texas and the wind power was blamed falsely for the cause of power outages. I'll now jump to 2 subcategories of the misinformation that's attacks on climate science. And as I said earlier, there are 2 main subcategories here, either attacking people, mostly climate scientists, or attacking the climate science itself. And we see that attacks on climate scientists is the main category here. It's the most common form of attacks on climate science, and also attacks on climate science itself, whether it's models or climate data, is on the relative decrease. And the reason why this is important is because there's very little research and very little actual practical work on countering attacks on climate scientists. Like, if there is all this misinformation with the purpose of reducing public trust in climate scientists and the scientific community, what are we doing in response to that? There's very little research into what are the most effective types of responses to neutralize these attacks and build public trust in climate scientists. And there's very little in actual campaigns or public engagement to do something about this. So this is a real hole in both the research and I think communication campaigns addressing misinformation that targets climate scientists. And I just wanted to briefly talk about what we're planning to do next. Now that the first step in the research has been done, we're now looking to not just use our machine learning model to build a history of misinformation, but also to do real-time detection of misinformation online as it gets posted. So we're looking to build a system that that scrapes online sources of misinformation regularly, and then if our machine learning model detects any misinformation claims, it updates, it sends notifications to interested parties. So that's currently in development, and we're hoping to roll that out later this year. Probably modest rollout with just a small number of users, and then just test it, iterate it, improve it, and then gradually expand its service. So I'll finish there. Anyone interested in this research, feel free to reach out to me. There's my email address, and you can also check out my work at there's websites and on YouTube. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much to you, John. Okay, let's. And thank you for adjusting the time very well. So it's impressive the work that you have done in your team, and with those volunteers also. Congratulate them for this job. I'm sure we can talk a lot about your work after the 4 presentation, but now we are going to the second presentation. Secondly, we have Bärbel Winkler, member of the skepticalscience.com. At her bio, she says that as a means to turn her concerns regarding climate change into something productive, as she joined the Skeptical Science team in 2010 and started translating selected content into German. So now is the issue of languages is also a very important issue, I think so. Since 2013, she has been coordinating the translation efforts for all languages and also writes blog posts as time allows. She is going to talk about resources to give facts a fighting change against misinformation. The floor is yours, Bärbel.
Thanks, Gema. So I'll share my screen. So can you see that in full screen now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Just make sure I have to. Okay, so thanks for inviting me to this panel. And I'd like to briefly introduce some resources shared by our Skeptical Science team to give facts a fighting chance against misinformation. And incidentally, John Cook, who you just heard, has been involved in all of them and most, and I think all of them wouldn't even exist without him. So before digging into them, let's briefly look at the question why these kind of resources are needed at all. To counter facts about human-caused climate change, we are being bombarded with a massive wave of misinformation about it. Vested interests, political polarization, the global nature of climate change, and misinformation add up to a perfect psychological storm, preventing people from accepting the reality of climate change. Recognizing this problem also provides the answer of how to respond to misinformation. We need to help people discern the difference between fact and fiction when faced with conflicting information. We can do this by explaining the techniques used to distort the facts. This is like exposing the sleight of hand behind a magician's trick. Once people see the technique behind a misleading argument, that misinformation loses its influence. So these resources will make an appearance. Our website, Skeptical Science, our MOOC, Denial 101X, Making Sense of Climate Science Denial, the history of Flick, the techniques of science denial, the Flick poster, the Conspiracy Theory Handbook, the Debunking Handbook 2020, and John's Cranky Uncle game and book. Skeptical Science is a website and registered non-profit science education organization with international reach, founded by John Cook in 2007. The main purpose of Skeptical Science is to debunk misconceptions and misinformation about human-caused climate change, and features a database that currently has more than 200 rebuttals based on peer-reviewed literature. Skeptical Science has evolved from a one-person operation, John, to a team project with volunteers from around the globe, and also features content translated into 25 languages. The Skeptical Science team actively contribute to published research, with one of the highlights being the often cited 97% consensus paper published in 2013. For a lot more information about what we are up to at Skeptical Science, please check out the interactive poster created for AGU 2020. You can access it via sks.to/AGU2020-poster. Denial 101X is a massive open online course, or MOOC, offered by the University of Queensland and the Skeptical Science team. Since 2015, we've had more than 40,000 participants from over 180 countries. The MOOC has 60 lectures about climate science and debunking misconceptions about it. 40 expert interviews go along with the lectures. Interactive exercises deepen the learning and regularly trigger discussions in the forums. The lectures follow the fact-myth-fallacy structure of effective debunking and use the Flick taxonomy of science denial. Flick is a framework originally proposed by Mark Hufnagel in 2007, who listed the 5 techniques of science denial, which are fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. These 5 main techniques are, however, just the tip of the iceberg, and John Cook has gradually been building up a landscape of different techniques used to mislead. As mentioned, Flick became the underlying framework for our MOOC Denial 101X, and it's one of the most popular takeaways for the students. The German counterpart Plurf recently went somewhat viral on Twitter after Dr. Christian Drosten, Germany's Dr. Fauci, explained it in an episode on his popular weekly Corona podcast. The Flick poster is the result of a successful collaboration between Skeptical Science and its German language partner website klimafakten.de. The poster's first version was in German, but the idea to also create an English version soon came up. This, however, involved more than simply translating the text, as some terms are different, and what is cherry-picking in English is called picking raisins in German, requiring different artwork. The poster can be downloaded from klimafakten.de in various formats, and it can also be ordered free of charge as a printout. Conspiracy theories attempt to explain events as the secretive plots of powerful people. While conspiracy theories are not typically supported by evidence, this doesn't stop them from blossoming. Conspiracy theories damage society in a number of ways. To help minimize these harmful effects, the Conspiracy Theory Handbook, written by Stephen Lewandowski and John Cook, explains why conspiracy theories are so popular, how to identify the traits of conspiratorial thinking, and what effective response strategies are. The handbook distills the most important research findings and expert advice on dealing with conspiracy theories. It also introduces the abbreviation CONSPIR, which serves as a mnemonic to more easily remember these 7 traits of conspiratorial thinking. The handbook has already been translated into 9 languages, and more translations are in the works. Among other insights, the handbook explains the 7 traits of conspiratorial thinking, which can be summarized as CONSPIR. Conspiracy theorists simultaneously believe in ideas that are mutually contradictory. Conspiratorial thinking involves a nihilistic degree of skepticism towards the official account, leading to overriding suspicion. The motivations behind any presumed conspiracy are invariably assumed to be nefarious. The overall conclusion is that something must be wrong and that the official account is based on deception. Conspiracy theorists perceive and present themselves as the victim of organized persecution. Conspiracy theories are inherently self-sealing, evidence that counters a theory is reinterpreted as originating from the conspiracy, making them immune to evidence. Small random events are reinterpreted as being caused by the conspiracy and are woven into a broader interconnected pattern. The Debunking Handbook 2020 is a consensus document that was created by an innovative process that involved a series of predefined steps, all of which were followed and documented and are publicly available. 19 co-authors were invited by the 3 lead authors, Stefan Lewandowski, John Cook, and Ulrich Ecker, based on their scientific status in the field, and they agreed on all points made in the handbook. They therefore believe that the new handbook reflects a scientific consensus about how to combat misinformation. Since its publication in October 2020, it has been translated into 10 languages. The Spanish translation was published earlier today, and more are in the works. The handbook has 5 main parts, which are available as excerpts on skeptical science at the shown URLs. Misinformation has the potential to cause substantial harm to individuals and society. Fact-checking can reduce people's belief in false information. However, misinformation is sticky and often continues to influence people's thinking even after they receive and accept the correction. It is therefore important to use the most effective debunking approaches to achieve maximal impact. Because misinformation is sticky, it's best preempted. This can be achieved by explaining misleading or manipulative argumentation strategies to people, a technique known as inoculation. Recent research has allied concerns about backfire effects, so there's no need to refrain from attempting to debunk misinformation. If you cannot preempt, you must debunk. And for debunking to be effective, it is important to provide detailed and clear refutations. Misinformation can then be unstuck. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce John's latest and most creative project to date, the Cranky Uncle game. For the last 2 years, John has been developing a smartphone game that builds public resilience against misinformation by explaining the techniques of science denial already mentioned as Flick. The way the game Cranky Uncle works is that a cranky uncle basically mentors you into how to become a science-denying cranky uncle by explaining all the different techniques that he uses to reject science. Cranky Uncle goes through each denial technique and says, well, here's one way that I deny science, and then he uses a lot of analogies, a lot of cartoon examples as a way of explaining those logical fallacies. And then the game gets people practicing critical thinking. It shows them examples of misinformation, and then they have to try to identify which fallacy or denial technique is in that example. The idea of the game is basically, once they have learned the denial technique, to practice that knowledge through repeated quizzes. And because of elements of gameplay like scoring points and leveling up, it incentivizes players to practice more, and the more they practice, the more inoculated they get against the misinformation. John quickly realized that teaching critical thinking to students in the classroom was a really powerful way to reach a lot of people that he wouldn't otherwise reach through social media or even mainstream media. He released a teacher's guide to Cranky Uncle, basically providing a lot of classroom activity ideas for teachers on how they can use the game, and then wrap some interactive activities around it to help reinforce the content of the game. And a lot more Cranky Uncle is available in John's book, Cranky Uncle versus Climate Change, published in February last year. The book helps people explain to science deniers, like the proverbial cranky uncle, how we got to this point, how to spot the telltale characteristics of science denial, and how to counter them. To do this, easy to grasp visuals, which are instructive and funny, come into play, and John ingeniously blended together his skills as a cartoonist and his PhD in cognitive psychology of misinformation. The result is a unique book that will help you spot myths and fallacies to counter science and solutions deniers. So that's all for now. Thanks for your interest. And John and I are looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Bärbel. It's an impressive, this list of resources that you have shared with us. And it's very, very important that you have done this work in translation, because for some sectors it's very necessary to have the local language, like education and so on. So it's very impressive with this big range of resources, from the school to the most adult guides or books. Thank you very much. Okay, so in this case we have Ferran P. Vilar. He's the creator and publisher of the blog Usted no se lo cree, that we can translate as you can't believe it. This is a blog. This blog has 12-year-old, and he's a telecommunication and electronic engineer, master degree, researcher and technical magazine editor, publisher and business manager. He was the president of the Spanish Business Press Association until 1996. And since 2006, he has devoted his time to learn about climate change from multiple and interdisciplinary perspectives. The name of his talk is Usted no se lo cree, you can believe it, a mix of personal blog and technical journal, temporarily censored by Facebook. So I really want to hear you, Ferran.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks. First of all, thank you to the organization for allowing me to show my work in this noble venue. And congratulations to the institution for this initiative and good work. I have to say that I discovered the problem of climate change through its denialism. I think it was in 2003. I was in Austin, Texas, and I saw a review in the New York Times from Al Gore. And it shocked me. Al Gore at this time reviewing the book. The book was Boiling Point from Gross Gelbspan. And then I ran to the bookstore to buy the book. And when in my travel back to Barcelona, the movie that was in the screens on the plane was The Day After Tomorrow. So I was really shocked. And being an electronic engineer by training and a publisher and editor by practice, I quickly understood what the problem of climate change could be. I quickly understood the seriousness, and some way I decided to devote the rest of my life, or professional life, even whole life, to the problem of climate change and to its dissemination. I made the travel from the science of climate change to the energy engineering, to economics, to sociology, and finally I ended in philosophy, and it includes also religion. It's the subject of the speech in the afternoon. The journey has been really rewarding intellectually, but it was really very disappointing personally and as a citizen. Okay, let's make a brief look at the blog. The blog is not mainstream on the climate science, on the consensus of climate science, but I follow the assert of Hans-Joachim Schellnhuber, who says that climate change is now reaching the end game, where very soon humanity must choose between taking unprecedented action or accepting that it has been left too late and bear the consequences. Therefore, it is all the more important to listen to non-mainstream voices who do understand the issues and are less hesitant to cry wolf, because unfortunately the wolf may already be in the house. I think that the systems dynamics, the systems thinking perspective that I have as a sort of DNA as an electronic engineer, and which is very rare, it's not used or very seldom used in the climate science, is what makes understanding the really seriousness. Because, for example, the models, the CMIP models of the IPCC, they are bottom-up models, and they are inherently they can't make an analysis of equilibrium conditions, yeah, margins of equilibrium, etc. So I realized that the climate community doesn't use this important tool, which is very only the geoengineering community uses it, which is mandatory there. But they don't see the climate system as a system analyzed with system dynamics. Well, the blog, the first post was in October, and it was after the smoke blog, but slightly before Skeptical Science. It has no income. I always said that the best asset is not to depend on any income or any promotion or anything like that. It was awarded by the Fundación Biodiversidad, which is a government agency in 2010. I wrote some 250 posts and 250 blog pages, some one per week in average, but the posts are not standard posts, are more like book chapters, okay, in length, and they always include references, a lot of references with a quote in every reference, okay. There are some 5,000 references today. Maybe there are 8, I don't know, 4, but there are many references. These quotes try to make us a kind of second script parallel to the one of the post of the text. Most of them are to peer-reviewed magazines, and I never link to CIHub. I wrote 2 series, which some people say that they're books, but they haven't been printed. One is to what extent is the collapse of industrial civilization near, which is a revision of the limits to growth of the 70s. And I started in 2019 a series which still continues, which is worse than expected. This is a friendly critique to the scientific climate community. Some criteria: the systems thinking perspective, which makes very clear what the tipping point is. I express my personal feelings while writing. I talk directly to the reader, and the references I make. One of the main subjects always present is denialism. Okay, I am very strong against denialism. And I wrote the structure of the denial machine. We will see later. I was showing the motivations and the tricks and the organization of the denial machine. And I asked never debate with a denier, unless it is a strong one-shot attack. This you can do. And if you are debating TV or radio or anyway, you have to be very trained under the PR techniques your opponent uses. Otherwise, it's better not to debate. Well, this is the post that was awarded, and the Titanic. The Titanic is a very good metaphor for the system, for the climate system, and the title was this is the mathematical certainty of the 5th chamber of the Titanic, because the engineer-in-chief said in one passage of the film, he said, if 4 chambers were flooded, there would be no problem. Well, the problem was tolerable, but with 5 chambers, this is a mathematical certainty, the Titanic will sink. But in fact, the real tipping point is that the Titanic was technically sunken before anybody foresee or got sight of the iceberg. This is an important point. And no, tipping points typically don't make any signal. Okay? Well, in sociology, I analyzed and exposed the dynamics of moderation from science to public and to policy. This is a graph from reality to public to action. There's some steps that accumulate the moderation. Okay, the problem loses its strength, its gravity, its seriousness in the process to the public and to the action. This is the graph, and this would need a full conference to explain. Okay. A policy also is that the IPCC downplays the risk. It adopts magical technological thinking that neoclassical economists and economics flood the entire IPCC. They are taken by the virus of growth, and they are impeded. They can't think out of the box. So I am sure, and I think I have showed and demonstrated that, in fact, the working group 3 in particular is fundamentally flawed with the integrated assessment models, its cost-benefit analysis, discount rates, etc. Also, the scenarios are not realistic. The scenario, there's not enough fossil fuels to generate the highest scenarios, and they don't consider the limits in renewables. I talked already about the models that increase the uncertainty with time. Sometimes they lead to negative learning, and equilibrium analysis is not possible. Well, I think the thresholds are, in analyzing this worse than expected, I found recently, I don't say 3 months, I'm sure that a global threshold has already been closed. In fact, you can see this in nature. This is not a theory. This is not a paper. This is a commentary. But those who have learned system dynamics, usually they talk in peer-reviewed magazines through commentaries, not through papers. Okay? And in fact, this is a necessity of system dynamics that cascade effects will unfolding if they are not unfolding yet, and that the global tipping point is under 1 degree centigrade. Well, I don't talk much about politics. When I talk, I use some metaphors like chess. And after Paris, I said that the only margin was the state of emergency, the global state of emergency. Always against the denialism, always mentioning. I connect it with neoliberalism, as most of you, all of you, and I made some profiles of the denialists. Okay, for example, this one. It's worth knowing that the worst climatologists, the denialists as the worst climatologists, not only of the 3%, but the worst of them. This is a sort of, he is a sort of fifth columnist in the IPCC, and Björn Lomborg, of course. And this is the structure of the denial machine. Okay, the lines, the continuous lines are money transfer, and the dotted lines of these continuous lines are at least influenced, might be money transfer, but it's mainly influence. Well, this afternoon we talk about Christian fundamentalism, which I think it's very important in this area of denialism. Okay, it is exposed, for example, in the case of Roy Spencer, John Christie also. I made a profile from him for him. But I don't deal a lot with Christian fundamentalism because it's. I fear people if you say so strange things as in Europe it is. I guess that in USA too, but especially in Europe, they won't believe anything. So the influence of this is not the main subject of the blog. Okay, and this is what I try to evidence with a list of think tanks, with a list of PR agencies, with a list of funding from foundations, from Christian foundations too, and all of them. This is a special section of the blog, but it's not organized as posts. You can see the hidden denialism propaganda too. This was when I was beginning Amazon. I bought some books on climate change, but the Amazon sent me mails with denialism books. Okay, and then I wrote a post about. I never debate with denialists. Here I explain in a 3-post series why I think you can use to us, unless you are trained. Okay, let's go to Facebook censoring. This was on August 7th last year. Any link to the blog was forbidden. and different message appeared. Okay, and I had a Facebook page named Usted no se lo cree, and all the references, all the posts disappeared. All the posts which were related to the blog, and the user was warned with different messages. Okay, he made spam, he has illegal content, he transgresses norms, and he has deceptive content. Well, it's really a problem that suddenly you have a censor and hundreds of thousands of people could see these messages, okay? And the attempts to contact Facebook were not fruitful. Okay, there was also live censoring, because when I was talking with Antonio Turiel, which is a high-level person in the Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas, we found posts disappeared, didn't appear, etc. So the speed was very low, etc. They were monitoring online alive. Okay, I was not alone, because Gaia Vences, which was a journalist in Nature, I think, and he has a blog. His blog was also censored. Okay, and somebody suffered too, because an Anonymous Spain or something like that. Okay, because Anonymous is a very strange organization and many fakes, etc. Well, they say that when they posted about the censoring to my blog, some 350,000 followers were eliminated. Okay. Well, strategical response. What did I do? Is to go to the art of war, and this means that you need to use the strength of your enemy to your favor. How can we do that? We made 2 documents. One was a degrowth manifesto as a forceful consequence of climate change, and some 60 high-level Spanish academics, including some economists, these official research, philosophers, other websites, signed this. There were most of them were high-level people. It was organized through a mailing list named Petrocenitales, which is in the Spanish language, made from communicators, and from Instituto Resiliencia, which is the United Nations University. And we publicize the other websites, okay? And we made a more reduced text intended for climatologists. Some people, well, I decided to have it on Facebook, and other people, other signatories followed in solidarity. But we, the most important thing is that we organized a press conference at September 9, gathering mainstream media with the NGO PRNC. Well, I got a highest levels of all. When I mean highest level, I mean, for example, Manola Brunet, which is the president of the Climatology Commission of the of the World Meteorological Organization, and other climatologists. Okay, what happened is the subscribers more than doubled. Okay, and I got the record in views. This is the text, and just after this conference, this press conference, and after it appeared on mainstream newspapers, the censoring was raised. Anyway, we abandoned censor Facebook. What did they censor? Nobody knows. Maybe because it's not a mainstream message in climate change and economics. Maybe for the Christian fundamentalism exposed, but it was there from 2010, other causes. Maybe the chaos was the last post. It was during the the first phase of the pandemics, which I wrote, pandemics and induced collapse. And this might have been. In fact, what I think is that there is some kind of talking point not to allow other extreme messages or non-mainstream messages on climate change, even on pandemics. We know yesterday Facebook workers denounced also censoring. Well, lessons learned is that you don't need, in fact, Facebook, that you won't have an answer about the trickies of Facebook without pressure and without mainstream pressure, because before the mainstream pressure there has been a lot of pressure. I know. Also, we learned about selective solidarity, you know, whom you can count on. And that, and now I think that censoring probably continues, especially with algorithms and restricting reach. This doesn't happen just. Okay, what's next is to, all this information is to make a database information, a database integration in the web, which is, I have a database of some 250,000 registries and with a memo field and categorized, and updating the list of think tanks, PR, funding, instructor. There's some 5 years I didn't update that. A new design for a web screen, change codes, etc. Okay, thank you very much. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Ferran. Thanks for sharing your experience, the way you work with your blog, and particularly this last experience with Facebook. So I will add one more lesson learned, is that you need time to work against denial, and you need also time to defend yourself from censorship. So we will talk after the last speaker. Thank you very much, Ferran. So you can stop to share your screen, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have our 4th speaker is Rachel. I think I pronounced it well, Rachel, or in Spanish we will say Raquel, but I'm sure it's not. What is the right pronunciation?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so Rachel Sherrington, she's a journalist at desmond.co.uk. Rachel is a researcher and journalist at Desmond, where she has led investigation into climate conflicted band directors and climate science denying groups, passion for environmental deregulation in UK trade deals. She previously worked at the charity Hope for the Future and as a researcher in UK Parliament. She completed her master's in global politics from London School of Economics, and she is going to explain us how high carbon industries gain influence and how media can hold them to account. So the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thanks so much to the organisers, and really excited to be part of this amazing panel. And yeah, here with you all today. So yeah, my theme, I guess, is how high carbon industries gain influence and how media can hold them to account. I think that's really at the heart of what DSMOG do, and I think what we all do really, and are all kind of here today to think about. So hopefully I can share some interesting insights. So I'm going to start off just introducing the work of DSMOG, kind of how we came about and what we do. And then I'm just going to talk through 3 of our recent investigations that I've worked on to kind of show how that works, and the importance and kind of role that independent media can play in debunking myths around climate change and contributing to the debate, and then just some concluding remarks. So DSMOG, we're an independent investigative journalist outfit. We're philanthropically funded, although we do take some small donations from our readership as well. And we were founded in 2009 with the aim of clearing the pollution clouding the climate science. So started in the US, particularly in response to this really kind of powerful network of think tanks and lobby groups funded by the fossil fuel industry that had risen up to kind of spread denial and obstruct action. And as the debate has changed and things have moved on, we're now a little broader. So we do absolutely still look at climate denial. That's kind of the core still of our work. But we also look at other ways that misinformation and kind of vested interest play out. So whether that's greenwashing, whether it's potential conflicts of interest in places of power that might be holding action up. And again, as John made the point so well, looking at kind of misinformation around solutions as well as the science. So as I said, DSMOG started in the US, and that was really reporting and our databases. So our databases are pretty much a comprehensive list of the prominent individuals and groups and think tanks that have been involved in climate denial. So that's particularly focused on the Koch-funded network of libertarian think tanks. So think tanks like the Cato Institute that have been so powerful. And the US side is also really focused on bodies like the American Petroleum Institute, so really powerful trade bodies in the US that have had a massive role in climate action, funding climate science denying and climate obstructing group. And then we've also interrogated the role of politicians, so people like Senator James Inhofe, and also a familiar face there, Donald Trump. For years before he became president, we were kind of looking at his claims and what he was doing around climate change. And all of those individuals are in our databases, as well as kind of monitored in our reporting. So the UK side of DSMOG, which I worked on, was founded in 2014. And as the Brexit debate kind of unfolded in the UK, we really focused our work on mapping the network of climate science denying, free market, pro-hard Brexit think tanks that have close ties to certain parts of the Conservative Party and certain ministers, and also have close ties with those US libertarian think tanks as well, often working together around Brexit. And then recently we've included other investigations. So for example, at the bottom, you can see we did a recent investigation to churches where their funding is, which has been taken on by people in the divestment movement, and also looking at oil companies' claims around nature-based solutions. And so recently, excitingly, we've actually become a global team. So the US and UK versions of DSMOG no longer exist. We've got a brand shiny new website, and we've been focused globally for a while, but we're really kind of looking to expand that global focus now and do our reporting and databases wherever that's most needed and across the world. So to talk through now a few of my recent investigations, which I hope will be interesting and shed a bit more light on how our work works and how we kind of contribute to countering misinformation and the role of vested interests. I want to talk about three pieces of work I've done. So the first is monitoring the work of the UK's leading climate science denial think tank. That's the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which I expect some or maybe most of you will be aware of. The work into looking at the conflicts of interest of bank directors who have a key role to play in addressing where finance goes in response to the climate crisis, and then kind of debunking greenwashing claims in fossil fuel company adverts. So the Global Warming Policy Foundation, as some of you might be aware, was founded in 2009 by the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson, has always had ties to at least certain parts of the Conservative Party, and again, that network that particularly kind of sprung up around Brexit of organisations based in the same office at 55 Tufton Street, so groups like Vote Leave and things like that. So on the right, you can see their entry in the DSMOG database, and that's really an up-to-date version of everything the Global Warming Policy Foundation has done. So when they put out a press release or someone is appointed, we will add that to our database. And that's really, we hope, a tool for academics, journalists, campaigners, anyone who's interested to really understand who they are and what they're doing. And then our work also involves reporting on kind of key events. So just in the past few weeks, the GWPF appointed 2 professors from Oxford University, and quite a prominent Conservative MP has joined as well. And so we kind of want to act as the place where you can go, that's kind of highlighting those ties for others to see. And a big part of our work has been mapping connections. So this is an absolutely huge effort by someone else at DSMOG UK to show how a group like the GWPF is then tied into other think tanks, other groups of influence, and with politicians who are making decisions. And our work on the GWPF has been used in the mainstream media, and we've also then done other stories around the groups that are tied to them. I think interesting to note is a lot of the stories are from a few years ago now in the mainstream media, and I think what this shows is that they've been effectively sidelined, and I think that's kind of one of the things that we've hoped to do by providing information on them, is to kind of single them out as a less legitimate voice with concerns on climate change. You know, they are platforming really prominent climate science deniers, and they're actually not an organisation that kind of has a real legitimacy in the debate. And I think the lack of media coverage, particularly in a lot of outlets, kind of speaks to the success of that. So the second project I'm going to talk through quickly was a project I recently completed. So this was looking at the financial sector, which is a really key part, we know, of meeting the Paris Agreement, but currently banks just aren't taking the decisions to actually shift their finance away from highly polluting industries and towards cleaner energies. So this project involved looking at the past and current experience of directors across 39 of the world's top banks. So it's a huge undertaking. The idea being that if directors maybe have current roles on an oil and gas company or have worked in a really highly polluting industry for a long time, they may be more sympathetic to that industry and a bit more hesitant to take action that takes finance away from it. So this investigation found that 65% overall had ties to polluting industries. I think 16% worldwide had ties to fossil fuels. And in certain countries, that number was much higher. So in the UK, I think 25% had past or previous experience in the fossil fuel sector. And to kind of illustrate one finding from that, we found that at Barclays, which is one of the leading fossil fuel funding banks, there were 2 successive CFOs of BP. So there seemed like actually really systemic ties that bank leaderships had to fossil fuel industry. And I think the kind of systemic nature of the problem then came through in the reporting and the overall findings. And actually, a couple of weeks after our investigation, the findings were published. The European Central Bank announced that director experience with regards to climate change would become a consideration of theirs when thinking about appointments. So the final investigation I want to discuss quickly is looking at fossil fuel companies' advertising. and analysing the claims that made in the adverts versus the reality of their businesses, with the aim to give kind of a comprehensive fact-checking resource where people can compare what these companies are saying in their adverts with what their business activity actually looks like. So one example is RWE. It's that advertising has really been focused on this idea of the renewable age. It's a renewable company, and yet 4/5 of its operations, nearly 4/5 are in fossil fuels, and really polluting fossil fuels are a big part of its business. So coal and brown coal as well. So this has led to these resources. This is a database which is not hosted on our site, it's hosted on the Client Earth site, but where you can see really comprehensively what these businesses look like, and then compare that with the advertising that we found. And again, this has been reported widely, and I think it's adding to a debate around kind of the regulation of these adverts, and should we actually be looking at kind of tobacco style regulations and health warnings and things like that. So to conclude, before we then get to questions, I'd say the nature of the debate has changed. We have seen the debate shifting away from climate science denial, but I think there are absolutely other types of denial that we're maybe seeing now. And the need to really interrogate those narratives and look for where the power is, where the vested interests are, is still really crucial. I think particularly projects like our banks project has shown that there's a potential to broaden out our understanding of where kind of blocks to action are happening, and vested interests lie, and what's worthy of investigation for those interested in climate. And then the third point is, I think, independent media and journalism are crucial in countering misinformation and identifying powerful interests and holding them to account. And yeah, thanks so much for listening.